Hi, my name is Michael Kennedy. I'm an instructor for Developmentor, and I'm here to talk about building REST-oriented web services in WCF and .NET 3.5 Service Pack 1. REST is the software architecture of the web itself. We'll see that if we embrace REST principles in our WCF services, we can build much more scalable systems than if we were to use the traditional SOAP-based web services. Additionally, because REST is a simple API based largely on URLs, we can communicate with a wider variety of platforms than if we were to use SOAP-based systems. So what's wrong with SOAP? Let's look at this WCF service to see the problem. Here I've defined a very simple service called iService that has three operations: login, order, and list items. And this service is located at the URI www.server.com/service.svc. So we're hosting this in IIS as an SVC file. Now, suppose that this is using one of the SOAP-based bindings, such as basic HTTP binding or WS HTTP binding. When I want to perform the login operation, the way the protocol works is I send a post message to the URL service.svc with an action set to login. If I want to do the order operation, I do a post message to service.svc with the action order, and for list items, again a post to the same URL with the action equal list items. The fundamental problem here is that we're representing all of our operations of our service as a single URL. With all of our operations represented by the same URL, there's no way to distinguish between them from outside the service. However, if you look at these operations, login and order are of a very different type than list items. Login and order alter the state of our service, and these are things that should be done once per user every time. On the other hand, list items is a read-only type of operation, and it seems like something that would be safe to cache. However, because they're all really from the outside going to the same URL, there's no way to distinguish between list items and login and order. If we could distinguish between them, we might be able to tell the system, hey, you can cache the output of list items, but don't cache login or order. And if we can cache list items output, we can cache it all the way to the edge of the internet. So in the various proxy servers of the ISPs, of the large corporations, all these guys can cache that output, and maybe many of the requests for list items would never even make it to our web server, much less actually run our code. So we'll see in REST that we can represent each of these operations as a separate URL, and we can describe them as different types. We could say login and order. These are the types of things that are altering the state of our system, whereas list items is read-only and therefore safe to cache. So how does this look in WCF? In .NET 3.5, the team added many new classes to make building REST-oriented web services much simpler. We have new URI templates for expressing how our URI should be built and how those map into our operations. We have two new attributes that work in conjunction with operation contract, WebGet and WebInvoke, that allow us to express how this URI maps into our operations and how the data flows from the URI into our web services. We have new bindings and behaviors which alter how WCF determines which operation is associated with which request. In the SOAP-oriented world, this was based on the action header. We'll see we no longer use action headers, but we use URLs to express which method is being invoked. And so we'll have the web HTTP behavior will help do that. If we're doing self-hosting, we have a new type of host object, a new host class called Web Service Host that simplifies some of the configuration for the self-hosting scenario. If we're hosting in IIS, we have the Web Service Host Factory, and this allows us to build REST-oriented web services in WCF with no configuration, which is really nice because normally there's a lot of configuration with WCF. Inside of our web service methods, we might need to get a hold of the HTTP headers. We might want to alter the content output type to say currently the output is JSON or it's XML or it's RSS. We can do that through a new class called Web Operation Context that derives from operation context. We also have new serialization formats for talking to AJAX style web applications. We can serialize our output as JSON as well as XML. We also have new APIs for building RSS feeds and Atom feeds for working with syndication. Let's put these ideas to use and extend an existing application to have new REST-oriented services. So let me show you a website that I've already built but does not have any REST-oriented services yet. This website is a simple website, very much like Twitter or any of these other micro-blogging websites, where somebody can log in, like so. Has a little landing page here, just tells you what the website is about. And if you go and look at the latest messages, which we call peep-outs, kind of like tweets, if you look at the latest messages, you can see a variety of people here have talked about, this WCF Screencast that we're doing. So imagine you've got some friends, you want to know what they're talking about. Everybody can send out short little messages. So here we could say, this is the screencast. Should show up down here, right? This is the screencast. So what we want to do is we want to take this data that's essentially trapped within our ASP.NET application. We want to expose it to the outside world. We have a variety of choices on how we expose it, but one real popular way would be some kind of syndication feed, either RSS or Atom. So what we're going to do for our demonstration is we're going to take this existing website and we're going to create RSS feeds on top of this data. And we'll be able to do it in various ways. So here, when we're on this page where we've seen everybody's conversation, I want to have an RSS icon here that lets me just view the whole conversation as an RSS feed. But notice we can also view the conversation by people. So here, Jacob Sutter has said 2 things, right? Maybe I only care about what Jacob says. I want an RSS feed from this view that only just shows me the messages from Jacob and suppresses everybody else's messages. So we're going to write a WCF service that is REST oriented, that generates both RSS feeds for single people as well as for the whole site. Okay, so let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a WCF service, and I'd like to put that into its own folder. So I'm going to say API, that's going to be the name, and then we're going to have a service. So I want to add a new WCF service, which lives down here, WCF service. I'm going to call it simply feeds.svc. Visual Studio will go generate the interface, the SVC file, the implementation file, and all that stuff. We can clean this up a bit here. And instead of having to do work, we want to have 2 operations that represent the 2 types of syndication feeds that we want. First one that we want is, let's just not talk about the return type yet. We want one that says get latest peep-outs, or messages, say. Simply return me all the messages. We'll have another one, say get me the latest messages by person. Well, string person. Or string name, rather. Right. And what we want to return here is we actually want to return the special type from the syndication world. We want to say system.serviceModel.syndication, and we can choose our formatter here. We'll say new RSS 2.0 formatter. We actually don't need all that namespace, right? We can trim that back and just import that namespace instead. Same thing down here. Whoops, maybe not that much. We'll do the same thing down here. I'll show you in a little bit how to also use Atom. Right. So this is a basic WCF service that returns these formatters, and we need to go implement them. So let's find our implementation here. So far we've done nothing to make these REST oriented. We're just working with the syndication APIs. So let me go over here and we'll say implement those pieces that we need. We'll go and look at the get latest message method first. Now the web service is factored into a presentation tier and a data access business object type of tier. And this repository class is the way in which we get access to the data down in the lower tier. So we'll create a repository. Let's create one of these. We can just simply say, give us all the messages. And we'll return an IEnumerable of messages, or peep outs as we call them down here. So what I want to do is I want to create a syndication feed that takes all of those items and then return that as a RSS 2.0 formatted syndication feed. So we'll start first by generating a syndication feed. We'll create a new one of these, and we can pass it a collection of items, IEnumerable of syndication items. We'll come back to what that is in a minute, how we generate those. We'll say that the title is equal to, you'd like to say something like this. You'd like to say latest peep outs at peopleocity.com. But it turns out that this is not text, but rather a text syndication content object. So that's kind of annoying that you have to do that, but it takes a string. So we'll create a new text syndication object here, and we'll just pass that along like so. Then I'd like to return the feed and say, here's your RSS feed, but it actually has to be, we'll have to say what type of formatting do we want. Do we want this to be an RSS 2.0 feed? Do we want it to be an Atom feed? Some other kind of feed we could make up? So we'll say, instead of returning that, we'll say new RSS 2.0 formatter, and we can pass it the feed that we want to format. Simply like that. So all that is left is to take this IEnumerable of peep outs and turn them into an IEnumerable of syndication items. And if we want to do some sort of transformation like that, link is a perfect way to do it. So we'll say var items equals, and we'll do a little transformation here. So we'll say from p in all messages. What do I want to do? I want to say select new syndication items. Not syndication feed, but syndication item. And what does it take? It takes a title. So we'll say the title can just be our message, say. Our content, let's see here, our content will be the message p.name, person name, plus says p.message, and the new URL to come back to. So we'll just say new URI, let's see, http www peopleocity.com for now. I'm not worried exactly about where that goes. And we should be able to just close that off right here and transform that. Maybe we want to, just to make sure we got the order the way we want it, we could say order by p.time descending. Alright, so now we've taken our peep outs and transformed them into syndication items. We've given those items to our syndication feed, set a few more properties, and we told that syndication feed to be formatted as an RSS 2.0 formatted feed. Okay. We want to do essentially the same thing down here, and for the sake of time I won't factor this out. We'll just copy and paste. That's really not the best way to do it. But suppose we want to get this by name. Come in here and say add a where clause. We can say where p.person name is name. Okay, so that'll give us all the messages by person, except there's a small little hang up that we have to deal with. Let's see if I can go back to my Peopleocity, and if I click on by person, let's go over here and say, oh, I lost my account, my session. Let's log back in. Go back here and list all the options, all the peep outs by person. If I click on Michael Kennedy, notice we put this plus where there was a white space so that we can have our URLs looking nice and neat. We need to undo that here because everything's going to come in with a plus. We'll say replace, anytime you see a plus with a space, okay, because it's stored in the database with a regular name, not with spaces. Okay. So that should do it. We have our WCF service built. It returns RSS 2.0 formatted syndication feeds either for the latest messages or for the latest messages by a given person. But this is not a REST-oriented service. This is a basic HTTP, or probably actually WS HTTP service. If we go down here to where the templates altered our web config, you can see the binding is WS HTTP binding. Now, to make REST simple in WCF, they added a new type of binding that does not do SOAP. It's called the web HTTP binding. And I could go and alter all these things in here. I could say I want to add a new behavior. I want to add the behavior. We could do it here, the web get, and so on, or the web behavior. But there's a much simpler way, right? When we talked about the things that was added for REST-oriented development, we have this new factory we can add for configuration-free deployment. So instead of altering our service model section, let's just remove it. Go back to our SVC file and say view markup. Inside here, there's a bunch of properties. Whether or not it should be debugged, what is the service name, what is the code behind. Let's format that a little more nicely. But one of them that is not listed here is factory. And in factory, we can put system.serviceModel dot activation dot web service host factory. And when we do that, that makes this a REST-oriented service. It says to WCF, use this host when you create this service. But there's another thing we have to do. We need to, now that we're not using the action header item but rather URLs, we need to describe how those URLs and web verbs, HTTP verbs, map to our operations. So here we can use the new web get attribute that lives in system.servicemodel.web, and we can say there's a URI template that describes how data is passed to this method. So here we can just say we want this to look like any time anybody says something like latest formatted as RSS, we want it to go to this method here. Down here when we need to pass some data, we could say something like this. Not only can you have static URLs or URIs, you can also have templatized ones that allow you to pass data as part of the URI. So here I can say name, and that name has to map, scroll over a little bit, there, has to be case sensitive, exactly the same as the parameter name. So that will allow us to say something like /latest /Michael plus Kennedy /RSS, and that will map to this method. And Michael plus Kennedy will be the string passed in for name. Okay, so these are some of the REST APIs built into WCF 3.5. So what have we done to make this a REST service? We've given it the factory that configures all the bindings and everything. We've set up our service contract to describe how the URIs map to our operations. And then we've simply implemented those as a regular WCF service over here. Whoops, over here. We've used the syndication APIs to format our data. Now let's go look at one of these. Let's try to run it here. So we can bypass some of this and just hack the URL itself. Say feeds /latest /RSS. How's that look? Let's see if we did everything right. Hey, look at that. It looks perfect. Now, Chrome doesn't format this very well, so let's look at this in IE8 and see how it looks. I think that will look a lot nicer. There, that looks like a syndication feed, right? And got our title, we've got our content, We could add other informations, categories, and so on, and that would show up over here. But this is a simple example of building REST services with WCF. Right? So we have all the people in here. Notice we got Terry Sandia, Jacob Sutter, Michael Kennedy. Maybe I just want Jacob Sutter's messages. Remember, we have this other one, this other service that we built, other method rather, excuse me, called get latest messages by person, and we pass it the name. But that's not the view we see from the outside. The view that we see from the outside is this URI template we've defined, /latest name RSS. So I should be able to type up here Jacob Sutter, and as long as I escape it according to our convention, should see just the messages by Jacob Sutter. Alright, so that's WCF REST. There's a whole lot more you can do. If you want to start adding data, here these are only read-only options. We could, instead of adding web get, we could add web invoke. Again, set the URI template. Template equals, maybe we want to use the same URI but a different verb. Instead of using get, we could say method equals post or put, depending on what you're trying to do. And we could have some messages down here, or operations that let us post new messages as well. You know, basically replace. Let's pull this up again. Remember how this was? We had, it would let us post new messages and basically take the place of what this text box does here. We could do this via HTTP post and WCF, but just for time's sake we won't. Okay, but that's what the web invoke lets you do. It lets you modify and alter your service. So to bring this back to our example back here, when we talked about how do we distinguish login and order from list items, we could use web get for our list items and web invoke with either put or post, depending on what we're trying to do, for login and order. And that would tell the whole web infrastructure that these are really different types of operations. List items is a read-only, idempotent type of operation, whereas login and order, those alter the state and should not be cached. Okay, so let's go back here and wrap this up. So if you want to see more WCF and REST, we at Development offer a variety of classes. We have an essential WCF class, which is a 5-day course completely covering all the different aspects of WCF, including, of course, RESTful services. We have a 5-day intensive course where we go 12 hours a day and dig really deep into .NET, called Gorilla.NET. We spend a lot of time covering REST topics there, as well as we have ASP.NET courses which have brief coverage of REST as well. If you want to learn more about this, visit Developmentor at our website, www.develop.com. Finally, if you want to download this stuff and take it with you, you can visit my blog, www.michaelckennedy.net/blog, and I'll post the screencast as well as the source code that you saw me write for Peopleosity. Thank you for your time.